So it's such a blessing to hear the words about how the process of enlightenment works. This idea that we can complete a collection of merit and a collection of wisdom, and those two things combined will be the causes for your total enlightenment. I mean, just even to hear that recipe, that's a real blessing. You see how it's caused. Now, as a bodhisattva, we want to protect all living beings from suffering. And so we're going to start to act in the world. But before we act, we have a kind of deep philosophical question we have to answer. How do we know what's right or wrong? Okay, we're going to act to prevent suffering. But if you're not a fully omniscient being yet, how do you know what's right or wrong? And it's even more complicated because the Buddha says you can't believe anything he taught until you prove it for yourself. You're not allowed to believe anything he said until you can test it and see that it's true. So there's no blind faith in Buddhism. There's a lot of go test it and see if it's true. So we have this problem. What's a proper moral compass? And particularly in a time of political strife. Because right now, some people in our politics seem to be pursuing an agenda of whatever I want is right, or whatever my donors want is right. Sometimes whatever the majority of the electorate wants is right. But for all its virtues, democracy has a history of being twisted by mob rule. Remember, there was a time in America where the majority of Americans voted for slavery. There was a time in America for 1.5 centuries where women didn't have the right to vote. So the law is not a good moral compass because history shows that laws are whatever those in power say they are. For example, 1875, the Supreme Court unanimously voted that the 14th Amendment, which provides equal citizenship to all people, didn't mean women should be allowed to vote. Supreme Court ruling that this equal citizenship that women were a part of, their equal citizenship did not include the right to vote. Okay? It took 45 years to overturn that legal decision. And that happened by constitutional amendment. Now, that was 1920. If that sounds completely antiquated and nuts, just consider that we're doing a very similar thing with Puerto Ricans today. So, as many of you know, Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. Puerto Rico paid $3.6 billion in federal taxes in 2016, which, if you're curious, is approximately 20% less than the citizens in Wyoming and Vermont for the same tax year. Now, people in Puerto Rico are allowed to vote in presidential primaries, but they're not allowed to vote in presidential elections. So you have citizenship without the right to vote for who leads you. So the law isn't a good moral compass. So what is a moral compass that always points true north to virtue? That's what we need to know before we act. And this one is a simple test. Would you want that done to you? If you were standing in somebody else's shoes, would you want that done to you? Jesus taught the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is a perfect teaching. Great rule, great method. Now, Buddhism gives us the why and the detail. The opening lines of the Abhidharmakosha, which is the treasure house of higher knowledge, says, deeds create the multitude of worlds. Such a cool opening. Deeds create the multitude of worlds. That means that what you do to others creates the world that you will experience personally. It's implied in Christianity and all other religions, right? If you're virtuous in this life, you will experience a better life after death. If you're wicked and harm people, you will have a hellish experience afterward. Again, these are very good teachings, very good. But now Buddhism is showing us the mechanics and the specifics of how it works. And I have to say, quite honestly, by studying Buddhism, I became a better Christian. My uncle was a Roman Catholic priest. I was an altar boy. I have very fond memories of the goodness of church. By using Buddhist methods of meditation, I learned to appreciate the perfection of Jesus' teachings even more. Particularly the teachings on forgiveness. When you find that you have the power to love someone no matter what they do to you, that's real power. Beautiful teachings. The rules that govern cause and effect, called karma in Sanskrit, teaches that whatever you do to someone else, it will be done to you. It's not optional. It's not negotiable. It's not as you would have them do unto you. It's forced. Okay? Both the good and bad. Every thought and deed places an order. You know, you witness everything you think and do, right? A mental seed is like a surveillance video in your mind. The mental seed, the mental images that are recorded, they then color how you see yourself and how you experience the world. That's how karma works. Kristen was reading a modern psychology book that defined self-esteem as your reputation with you. That was very cool. And you know, how you see yourself comes from past actions. The Buddha explains that karma is action motivated by intention that leads to future consequences. Now, karma ripens in this life, it ripens in the next life, or a life after that. Unless you learn to regret, restrain, and purify yourself from that karmic seed. Arya Nagarjuna noted that all the confusion in the world comes from this time lag. Like, if as soon as you did something wrong, you got a wrong result, you would stop doing it. But the problem with mental seeds is they're like other seeds. They need time to grow before they can ripen and manifest in your experience of the world. And so what that means, what happens in this moment, has nothing to do with what happens in the next moment. Those are two separate instances. Those are two separate ripenings. Those are two separate seeds, and they're not connected. So you've probably had this experience in your life where you want to compliment somebody or say something nice to them, and they blow up. You know, It's like, because those things aren't connected. They're two different ripenings. One of the places that the Buddha explains how karma ripens is in the Penetrative Sutra. He says, intention, I tell you, is karma. Intending, one does karma by way of body, speech, and mind. And what is the result of karma? The result of karma is three sorts, I tell you. That which arises right here and now, and that which arises later, and that which arises following that. This is called the result of karma. Jason Kappa breaks that down in the Lamrim Chemo, and he explains, in accordance with the Buddha's teachings, karma that you experience here and now is the effect of actions which happen in this very lifetime. And they ripen in this lifetime. That's what's meant by here and now. Not this, but something you did earlier. Maybe it's 6 months later, maybe it's 6 years later, maybe it's 60. But it ripens at the end of your life. Karma which arises after that is what you will experience after having been reborn in the next life. And I know rebirth is kind of an uncomfortable topic for Westerners. But it's already implicit in every religious tradition. Be virtuous in this life, and in the next life, you'll get your reward. Okay. So it's not that big of a cultural stretch. And any of you that are parents, you can see that your children come in with their own individual personalities from day one. Okay, there's karmic seeds and karmic patterns going on. And karma that you experience following that is the effects of actions which will ripen in or after the third lifetime.
So that was the when of karma. So now we'll talk about the how and why with karma. There are 4 main laws of karma that everyone should know. And the great master, Arya Nagarjuna, he said that you just need to know what farmers know to understand the rules of karma, okay? So we're gonna talk in terms of like farming, okay? So the first law is that the result is always similar to the cause, okay? So you plant watermelon seed and you get watermelon plant, okay? That's pretty easy to understand. Good seeds create good results. And in Buddhism, it's not so much like a moral thing about good or bad. It's good results in pleasant feelings, right? Bad results in discomfort and suffering. Okay, and then there's lots of neutral stuff. Okay, the second law is that the results are always bigger than their causes. So the watermelon seed is tiny compared to the thing that comes out at the end. Okay, and this one is terrifying if you do a lot of negative things. It's great if you're actively doing lots of positive things. That's amazing. I think a lot of us, like, we've grown up with this attitude of, well, if someone didn't see me do it, I didn't really do it, I won't get in trouble or whatever. Not true. Like he was saying, you are recording everything, right? And even small acts, particularly if you do them repetitively, can have quite significant results, okay? Like if you do like a little office gossiping or divisive talk or something, don't be surprised if you have trouble in your relationships, Your partner becomes disenchanted with you. They start thinking bad things about you. Or your friendships have problems and fail, right? Okay, so 3, if you don't plant the seed, you can't get the result. So again, with the farming, you don't expect to get a crop if you didn't plant the seeds, right? That's easy to understand. But it also means that nothing happening to you is random and disconnected from you, okay? The fourth law is if you did plant the seed, you must get a result, okay? And he mentioned purification. So, okay, what if you come to realize that you've been doing a lot of negative things? Okay, there are methods to take care of that. You regret it, right? You make efforts to not do it anymore. And you can apply antidotes to it, like doing the opposite of it, right? And then that's it, like when you think of farming, that's like you've planted something, but then you starve it of the things that it needs to grow, okay? So you can do that with seeds too. And then, so it's a little bit of circumventing this last law, right? You planted the seed, you must get a result, but you can drastically reduce that result, okay? So farming is a really good metaphor for what we're doing as bodhisattvas. We are gardening our entire world, right? We are consciously planting seeds and cultivating things and gardening, right? So the Buddha gave us a list of 10 non-virtues. These are kind of like the Buddha's 10 commandments. They're 10 non-virtues, and these are the things that we're all doing. They're our biggest problems. Mostly we're doing them all the time, right? And no matter what method you're following, monastic, bodhisattva, you want to avoid these non-virtues. But with the Bodhisattva approach, it's a little different because you avoid it, but you also actively do the opposite, like we've mentioned before, right? So we'll quickly go through these. So the first one is killing, right? So we need to actively protect life. Make a vegan green smoothie for your partner, you know? Don't speed when you're driving. Okay, stealing, the opposite is protect other people's property, right? Sexual misconduct, honor other people's relationships. When you're talking to someone who's in a relationship, do it as if their partner is standing right there next to you, okay? Lying. So here we want to tell the truth, but we even want to go further and even correct wrong impressions that people have in their minds, okay? Harsh speech. We want to speak softly and gently. We want to speak in a way that's going to make people feel safe, that's going to be pleasant, right? Divisive speech. Speak in a way that brings people together. Idle talk about meaningful things. Right? Ill will, wish success and happiness for other people. Coveting, rejoice in all the cool things that other people are doing. Right? And then the last one is wrong worldview. And this is mostly referring to not accepting karma and its consequences, right? So an example of that might be you're nihilistic, you think nothing you do matters, right? And you guys are all doing the opposite of wrong worldview. You're coming to a class to learn wisdom, right? So Bodhisattvas avoid these things and they actively do their opposite because they're actively gardening their world. Right?
And I hope this gives you some control of your life. Like once you understand the rules of karma and you know these 4 rules, you create the world that you want to create. You create the life that you want to create. If there are things in your world that you're not so proud of, it's changeable.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting to learn about how to be a gardener, how to garden your own mind and your own world and, diagnose, oh, I'm surrounded by this. I don't want to be surrounded by that. So let me be the change that I want to see in the world. So I hope you see karma through a very empowering lens. Okay. Cause and effect. So bodhisattvas are going to be super excited about cause and effect. They're like, oh, I can wield this. I can do good stuff with this. So they start to really be good gardeners. Now, in bodhisattva practice in particular, because it doesn't have just a method component, it has a wisdom component. And in order to strengthen the wisdom component, the greatest sin in bodhisattva practice is selfishness. Putting yourself first before other people's needs. Master Shantideva says it clearly in one of his most important verses. The total amount of happiness that exists in the world has come from wanting to make others happy. The total amount of suffering that exists in the world has come from wanting to make yourself happy. Whoa. That is such a shift from what our culture generally teaches. The whole, you got to look out for number one thing, right? You got to take care of yourself. And here Master Shantideva is just stepping up and saying, well, actually, that's the cause of all the suffering in the world. And you know it. You can feel in your heart every time you start worrying about what's going to happen to me. How is this going to affect me? Well, I can't believe they said that about me. How does that feel? You get that heart-crushing feeling in the center of your chest, right? And every time you're like, oh, this would make this person happy. Oh, this would make their life better. This would make their life easier. You feel the opening, right? Now you get to take this test as many times as you want, okay? You can do it as many times as you want. It will keep coming out the same way. And Master Shantideva says, if you fail to practice perfectly this exchange of your own happiness with the suffering of others, you will never reach that enlightenment. And even here in the cycle of life, there is no happiness. So, if you want the secret to happiness and success, here it is. In every situation, pay attention to what other people want and make efforts to give it to them. And everything works out just fine. As soon as you're like, well, what do I want? What do I need? There will be friction. There will be conflict. And there won't be success. And test it. Go see for yourself. Now, as a bodhisattva, being aware now of the laws of cause and effect, being aware of karma, being aware that everything is up for grabs because it's empty of any self-nature and things change all the time, and being aware that selfishness is the cause of suffering, then you can start to look out in the world And as soon as you see something infected with selfishness or infected with the 10 non-virtues, you can just go, that's not going to work out. You already know that is suffering and the causes of suffering in the making. So as a bodhisattva, it's your duty to oppose suffering and the causes of suffering in your own mind and in the mind of others. You'll recall from last week, we talked about Master Shantideva's life, how eventually he left the monastery and went out to start coaching people who had fallen into wrong view, and even counseled kings on how to rule ethically. So let's consider how someone like Master Shantideva might advise our own government. Recently, we had a massive tax cut that was supposed to supercharge the economy. In spite of warnings from every economist and the Congressional Budget Office that it would balloon the deficit. So now we have the hard data. The hard data has come in. And we can see that the tax cuts are on pace to balloon the national debt to around $33 trillion in 10 years, which is 1.5 times the size of the American economy. Meaning that if every dollar everyone in America earned, every company earned, went to paying down the debt, it would take us 1.5 years to do. And of course, that's impossible because people need food, they need shelter, companies need to pay salaries. So in the very near future, we're going to be spending $450 billion just on the interest on this massive debt, which is 6 times what we pay for education, which is more than we spend on roads, bridges, and water in America. So you can see that this is a level of debt that can't possibly be paid back without some heavy financial austerities. If you're someone like Master Shantideva, your moral compass should be saying, this is a kind of selfish stealing. We're stealing a future generation's opportunity for economic security and advancement. It's like we're saying to a whole generation that hasn't even been born yet, we had a big party a decade ago, and we thought you'd want to pay for it. Here's the bill. Okay? Now, would you want that done to you? So you can see very easily how valuable this perspective on would you want it done to you, how clarifying it can be for even complex economic issues. Once you understand the wisdom of morality, you'll be able to look at anything in your life and eventually know how it's going to turn out. I have to say eventually because there is the time lag. But you can see directionally how it's going to go.
So, as bodhisattvas, this is really important. We can be outraged by that kind of thing. We can be outraged by injustice, but we should not become enraged, right? You're enraged by people. You think you're making people suffer, you're bad, I want you to suffer too, I want you to hurt, right? With enragement, there is anger, there's a desire to hurt, right? But you can be outraged. You can be outraged and you can still think clearly and rationally, like Gandhi, like, Dr. Martin Luther King, right? But when you're enraged, you can't think clearly. You're blinded. There's that phrase, you see red, right? So it helps to not confuse the mental affliction with the person, like we talked about in last class, right? You have to be clear and rational in your analysis of the situation. Like, for example, with the thing that's, the immigration policy with like kids being in cages, right? So you look at that. What is going on there? You can deduce, okay, there's a lack of equanimity that's driving this, that is causing groups of people to be treated as less than human, right? That's a lack of equanimity. You can use your rationality to kind of figure that out. So we deduce what is the mental affliction driving this. Because we're not getting enraged at people. Remember Shantideva with the stick, right? We want to get to the real problem. What's the mental affliction, okay? So in this example, it's a lack of equanimity, right? So then, okay, we know that. Then what do we do? What can we possibly do, okay? Number one, look inside your own heart for anything that resembles lack of equanimity. Okay, so the first thing is you look inside yourself. What am I doing in myself that is similar to this, right? And then you work on that. And then the other thing that you do is that without mental affliction, you can take action in the world, right? You can call up your representatives. You can oppose the policy, right? But the key is do it without mental affliction, right? So you can take the conventional action in the world. And these steps, you do them whether it's, it doesn't matter if it's a political situation like we're talking about or a personal situation in your life, right? You're having an issue with your life with someone. What is the mental affliction driving it? Check and see within yourself, what am I doing that's like that? Once you are addressing that in yourself, taking responsibility for that in yourself, right, then you can go and you can take direct action, right, without any mental affliction.
So it's good to get to moral clarity and have a very strong moral compass about, would I want this done to me? And as Kristen said, we're not getting mad at the person, we're getting mad at the mental affliction. So then go to a place where you can have that moral clarity and you can have equanimity and you're not mad at the person. You're mad at the mental affliction driving whatever is harming others, and then act. So, make sure you meditate before you call your congressman, before you call your senators, before you call the White House. Then your words have power. Then when you say to the aide who's tasked with taking the phone calls, I don't want my hard-earned tax dollars going to a policy that's scarring children for life. I wouldn't want that done to me, and I don't want it done to anyone. Then that has power. And when you have wisdom, even that small, tiny deed ripples in the world. And that's what you start to see. Tiny seeds, bigger results. Tiny acts, slowly increasing the goodness in the world. Having that moral clarity about what's right and wrong. Now, here's another place that gets tough. We can't even wall off our hearts from the people that perpetrate even the most horrible crimes against humanity. They're part of my mind too. So you can't build a wall between you and that other person. You can't hold any sort of mental affliction. And so a real helpful technique is, again, separate the mental affliction from the person. So in this example of the zero tolerance policy that's leading to tearing children from their family, putting them in cages, it appears that racism is driving this policy, that there's fear that American demographics are going to somehow shift, even though American demographics have always shifted. And that's what's led to us becoming the most powerful, successful country on the planet. So it appears that the people behind these policies are motivated by racism, by white nationalism. But it isn't their true nature. Okay? With wisdom and method, we see past the affliction. We know that people can learn better things. We saw a beautiful show a few months ago called Breaking Hate. And it was this former white nationalist, skinhead, neo-Nazi, Christian Picciolini. And he realized one day what he was doing was wrong. And he got out of the movement of white nationalism. And now as a remedy, as a makeup activity, he works directly to pull kids that are being sucked into that white nationalist propaganda, to pull them out of it. And on the show, he took this one white nationalist kid who was at the Charlottesville rally to sit down with Heather Heyer's mom. Now, Heather Heyer was the woman that was killed when an alt-right person plowed a car into the counter-protests. And so he sits down with Heather's mom, and you could just see the lights going on and the kid realizing, I can't devote my life to hate anymore. Racism is learned. Equanimity is learned. Love and kindness for all beings is learned, you see. And Malcolm X had a similar transformation. He was oppressed and so lashed back at his oppressors. But then in 1964, he goes to Mecca and he sees this sea of people, all different nationalities, all different colors, and he has an epiphany. It's not the skin color, it's what's in people's hearts. In 1964, he writes, "Out of the sudden darkness comes sudden light. My, how fortunes change." So people can shift. So as we approach dealing with mentally afflicted people, shift your language. Don't say, he is racist. There is racism. Don't say, he's greedy. There is greed. Because we have to acknowledge we change, and you have to leave that opportunity open for change. Ignorance forces people into boxes and tries to keep them that way. So very wise to admit, you change, I change, we all can become better people. When a bodhisattva looks at the world and sees a mentally afflicted person, he doesn't think a mentally afflicted person is that way. That's their nature. He just thinks that's caused. And those causes can be removed, and they can achieve their Buddha nature. They can change. And then a bodhisattva acts with wisdom. They see mental affliction, and then they're like, okay, I've got to increase virtue. How can I be the change I want to see in the world? Does that sound familiar? Gandhi was able to get the British out of India without firing a shot, based on this is wrong, this is immoral, you wouldn't want this done to you, and we're not cooperating. We're not going to increase this activity. And it took 50 years. Okay. But freed a nation without firing a shot. And this was Gandhi's approach. So mental affliction is the only enemy. And I hope you're not surrounded by mental affliction in your life. But if you are, doing the opposite is a very powerful technique to increase goodness in the world. It's a beautiful path.